Hi, I'm James with British Customs. Today we'll be installing this Tracker Handlebar Kit on this 2022 Triumph Street Twin. First thing we want to do is remove the seat so we can access the battery. You can use a number 3 Phillips screwdriver or a 10mm socket on the screw. Disconnect the negative battery terminal. So next we want to remove the gas tank, and we would advise that you try and time this job when the tank is almost empty. It'll make it much easier to work with. And make sure you have a place to put it before you take it off. You don't want to be caught holding the tank and have nowhere to put it. So using a 10mm socket and your 8mm wrench, so you want to lift your tank up. Helps to have a block of wood, just a 2x4 you can put underneath there. And you need to disconnect your hose from the fuel tank. You want to put a rag down here just to collect any residual fuel that comes out of the hose when we disconnect it. To disconnect this hose, you have this clip here. It needs to get pushed back to unlock here. You have a piece to push on here. There's the same thing on the other side that you can't see here, but you need to be pushing on the both of them. When you pinch on that, you can lift the hose up. And it can sometimes be difficult if you got fat fingers. And it is a tight fit. You want to make sure that you wipe up any excess fuel that spills down on the motor. Then we want to start to squiggle the tank back a little bit. Turn your block of wood so you can have a little more room to work. Next, we need to remove these two plugs that are attached to the fuel pump. Just pick them up, pull them out to the outside. There's a little tab right here that you just need to lift up on and unplug it. You can see this one better because it's white on black. Just pull that up. And unplug it. So on the left side of the bike, we need to remove this vent hose. On some models, you'll have a fitting right here. You can just detach it there. On some of the older models, you have to detach it from up on the tank here. And then there's little tabs that you need to pull it out of, that you can pull the hose out of and get it out complete. Now we're ready to remove the tank. Remove the block of wood. Pull the tank back. And bring it over to your safe place that you picked out before. All right, the next thing we need to do is we need to remove the brake fluid because we're going to be removing this brake line to install this kit. So we don't want to have any .4 brake fluid dripping around. So first thing we're going to do is remove this cap with a Phillips head screwdriver. If we don't remove this cap and try and apply suction down below, it's not going to get all the fluid out because it's just going to want to suck the cap in. And there's a little rubber diaphragm under here that needs to come out because that'll just keep going down with the fluid. You don't want to get this .4 fluid on anything because it will eat away at your paint. So that's why we keep a rag down there just in case. So next we want to hook up our vacuum hose up to our bleeder valve. This is an 8mm. Loosen it. And go a few turns so that it's nice and open. It'll make life easier. Okay, I have my Mighty Vac hooked up. And we're going to start pumping. And you can see the fluid start coming through. Your other option is if you have a power Mighty Vac, air operated, it'll make this job a lot quicker. But there you go, you just heard it empty out of the reservoir. So a little bit more, make sure we're getting it out of the complete hose down to the ABS unit at least. Okay. And I think we're good there. So now we're going to tighten off the bleeder screw. I like to put a little vacuum to this as I take it off so I don't spill any fluid out. Okay. Now we want to remove the banjo bolt from the master cylinder using a 14mm socket or wrench. Keep a rag under here to catch any brake fluid. Now we're going to remove the master cylinder from the handlebar using our 5mm Allen bit. While you're still holding the master cylinder in your hand using the T20, you want to remove the brake light switch. Now we want to loosen our cable adjustment using a 12mm wrench. And this will allow us to take it off up top and give us more slack in the cable. All right, now we're going to remove the clutch cable from the lever here. So we pull this out, and as we spin these in, we get these two slots to align with the slot over here. And now we can come out. And then pull the cable straight down. That's it. Using our 5mm Allen hex bit, remove the clutch perch. Make sure you hold both sides so that it doesn't fall down. Using our T20, remove the clutch switch. Using our Phillips head screwdriver, we're going to remove these two screws from the switch housing. Next, we'll remove these two screws using our Phillips head screwdriver. Next, we're going to remove these two screws, the Phillips head screwdriver. Using a 4mm Allen hex bit, remove the end cap. Now we'll remove the handlebar clamp using a 6mm Allen hex bit. On this last screw, make sure you're holding the bar and the clamp so that you don't drop. Now we want to pick up the bar. Now you can remove the throttle tube from the fly-by-wire sensor. So now we're ready to remove the clutch cable. Start by pulling that rubber piece off. You can take the cable, and as you push it back, it relieves itself from this notch back here. Undo this nut. Pull the cable back and out of the slot. Now using a T30 Torx, I'm going to undo this screw and that screw. Can undo our clutch cable from there. And this clip that holds the speed sensor on. Now we just want to remove this rubber strap. It has a little slot in it. Pull it through. And now we can pull our cable down and out. So now we have to raise the bike up to take the weight off of the rear wheel. Use a flat jack. You have to make sure that you're clearing everything as you go up. You don't want to crush your oil filter. You don't want to be resting on the engine case. If you're in the front, you don't want to hit the catalytic converter. So back here, we have 2 points where we're on the frame and not in contact with anything else. And there you go, the rear wheel is off the ground. I like to lower it till it just touches. Using 27mm socket, I want to loosen the rear axle. If you have a chain guard installed, now's the time to remove it with these 2 bolts here, using a 5mm Allen key, or if you have a short enough bit, you can use a ratchet. If you're still running the stock license plate bracket, it will be helpful to jack the bike up a little bit to get your rear wheel out of there. Otherwise, you may damage the fender. Now we're going to remove the suspension, remove the stock bolts with an 8mm Allen hex bit. Now with the screws removed, I can pull the shock outwards until it gets past the standoff. Just move it to the back a little bit. So we're going to do the same thing on this side, except we have to make sure when you pull this off, you're going to have the weight of the swing arm on it. So you need to be a little more supportive of it. Now that the suspension is down, we can get to the bottom bolts. Using an 8mm Allen hex bit, can remove the screws. Now we're going to remove the clips that hold the ABS wires. There's one here and one there. You want to be careful that this is just hanging here, the brake caliper, so you don't want it to just fall off and drop to the lift and get damaged. So here I have a tool that fits this, but you could easily go in there and just pinch those and pluck them out, but they come out real easy. Now you can lower the caliper down. Now we're going to remove the left side pivot cover. You just need a small flat blade screwdriver or a little pry bar. There's a little slot right there. It doesn't take much to pop that off. Now we're going to remove the sprocket cover using an 8mm socket. You have 4 screws, 2 on the bottom, 2 on the top. So when we take this last screw off, make sure you support this so it doesn't fall. Now we can get to our pivot nut. Okay, using a 24mm socket, we want to remove this nut. It helps if you have a nice long breaker on it. Remove that nut. All right, now you just want to use a rubber mallet and tap the pivot just till it's flush, and then you can go to the other side and pull it out. So using a 19mm socket, you can spin it and just put a little pressure and she starts to come right out. All right, now that this is out, we advise putting it in on the other side just to keep everything in alignment. Just gonna slide it in on this side. You don't have to push it all the way through, just to support the swing arm there. So we also recommend, if you're doing this on your own especially, that you support the swing arm. We're gonna use a strap here. You can use a ratchet strap, you could use string, you could use a box under here. whatever you got, just something to take the weight off of the back. You could use S hooks like this and a bungee cord, it'll work. So now we're going to use a specialty Triumph tool to take out the swing arm. There's a locking mechanism in here for the swing arm that you have to take out. It has 2 notches in it, and this fits into the 2 notches. Use a 22mm socket. Get that aligned in the notches. And then you put your socket on and turn it out. Back it out till it stops, and that's it. So this is important where we have the straps supporting the swing arm, because when I remove this pivot bolt, it's going to want to fall out of there. At this point, we can just wiggle this a little bit. It should pull out of there. Just unhook it from your straps, and then we can set it aside. Now we're going to remove this cover. You got 1 screw there and 1 screw here, using a 5mm Allen hex bit. If you have difficulty accessing this screw with your tool, you may need to remove the muffler. Now we need to remove the right side cover. It's pretty simple. There's 3 studs going into rubber grommets here. Just need to pull on one at a time. Comes right out. Now we need to remove the carbon canister. You have 2 screws right here, 3mm Allen hex bit. Now we need to pull this out that way, set it off to the side so we can access our hoses. Now we're going to remove the brake line. You have 4 brake lines coming into the ABS unit. We want to remove the furthest one back to the left. Got your 12mm socket. Loosen it up. You want to have a rag ready in case there's any brake fluid. You can clean it up. I like to put a little baggie over it, just so if there's any drips as I'm pulling it out, I don't have to worry about them getting on the bike. Just throw a little tape around it. So now we need to remove our ABS line starting from the back going out. Freeing up the line by removing this whole little assembly here will make it easier. So I'm going to start by pulling that out, pulling this out. And you have 3 torque screws that we want to get to. These are a T20. So one other screw we have to get is an 8mm. That's right in here, above the sprocket. Your 8mm socket. Now we're going to unplug this connector. You pull up on that tab, separate them, pull that off to the side. Now we're going to pry out the outermost brake line, is the one we're removing. Now we can pull that out. Now we need to remove the brake line. I put a little baggie on this side too, just to keep any drips. Just need to remove this rubber strap. To free that up, and then we're going to push it through to the other side of the bike. On the left side of the bike, we have another strap. We want to undo that. Pull the brake line towards the left side of the bike. Now we need to push it through back to the other side. Now we're going to start removing this upper line. We're going to pry it out of here. We also want to pry the bottom line just out to free up room to remove this. And we're going to come out from this side. Pushing with your finger on the brake line as it comes through helps you get it through. Pulling on the back of the line and rotating it up helps it free up a little bit. Now that we have the upper portion pulled to this side of the bike, we can pull this out this way. This is a real pain being one solid brake line like this. That's why with the BC kit, we made it 2 pieces, so it makes it a lot easier to do. So getting the Banjo through here can be a little tricky. So in this kit, we have 2 brake lines. The reason for that being is it makes it a lot easier to route this one line in that way, and then this one line that way. Both are flexible instead of a hard line. And then they're just joined at this union. Makes them solid right up here. The other advantage to that is if you ever change your bars down the road, all you got to change is the one line, and this all stays there, and you don't have to go through this whole thing of removing the swing arm and everything to change that. So another thing to take note of is on the Street Series only, we have a straight fitting into the master cylinder. On the Bonneville Series, there'll be a Banjo bolt that goes to a Banjo fitting. This is only for the Street Series. In the kit, you have 2 brake lines, one lower and one upper. The upper has no fittings on the end, it's just the AN to go to a Banjo bolt. The lower already has a Banjo installed on it, and it has the union installed on it, which is not tight. We'll be tightening that later on. This is the one we're going to start with. We're going to start by routing the brake line up from the inside where the union is. You want to make sure you're coming above the electrical lines here, just below this brake line. Then we're going to slide up under the frame here. push on the wires with your thumb there. It'll help make a little room for you. You could also take the union out of there if you like. It doesn't need to be on there this whole time, if that makes it easier for you. So you want to pull this up until you're just about where you can get your banjo into the ABS unit. The banjo washers in the kit, there's two of them, one thick and one thin. The thicker one goes on the bottom where the ABS unit is, the banjo goes on top, and then this one goes on top of that one. Before we do anything else, we need to make sure that we remove the washer that was originally there. If you try and install your washer on top of that, you'll never get it to seal. So now we want to grab the thicker of the two washers. It's definitely obvious which one's which. Put that on the ABS unit. Put the thinner washer on our banjo bolt that we removed earlier. All the brake lines have their own channel. Our channel that we're putting our brake line in is right here. You need to make sure that it's in there before this is tightened down. Start your bolt in. And with your 12mm socket, start tightening down. While you're tightening down, hold the line into the guide. Before you fully tighten it, make sure it's in there nicely. So this is the orientation you should have here. The bolt with the thin washer, your banjo, and then the thick washer underneath. Next, we want to torque our banjo bolt 25 Newton meters with a 12mm socket. Place our brake line into the clip. And we're going to put these screws back into this plate to hold it. Using a T20 torque spit. Put this back in. You only have to make these hand tight because they're going into plastic. You could easily strip it out if you make them too tight. Then using our 5mm socket, we're going to put the screw back into this plate here. You can start putting all our connectors back into the tray. I'm going to plug this one in. You got these two tabs here, go into these two slots here. Put that one back in there. That's it. Now we're going to install the charcoal canister. This little pin right here goes into that rubber O-ring. Push it up, have your screws ready. Using your 3mm Allen hex bit. Put one in to hold it up. The other one. So you only want to go hand tight on these. They are going into brass, so you don't want to strip it out. Now we can install our coolant cover. Make sure you have your top hat washer in place. Your 5mm Allen hex bit. The other one. Again, make sure the top hat's in place there. So these screws only need to be hand tightened. So now it's time to put the swing arm in. Make sure your chain guard is on the right side, and that way you know you're oriented right with your shock bolts up. Slide the swing arm through the chain. Now we can put our hooks from our strap in here, which will make it a lot easier to have that support, especially if you're doing this on your own. So one thing you want to make sure is you have wires and hose coming down here. You don't want to pinch them or kink them at all. So we need to turn the swing arm a little bit on an angle to get past those. So now we're ready to slide the shaft in. You want to align the holes and make sure the chain, if you pinch your chain in here, you're going to have a difficult time. So just, if you're having a hard time, make sure the chain's not blocking you. Start the shaft through. And don't go all the way through. We're just using this to hold it in place. Then we have to go over to the other side and tighten up. So you want to have your pivot shaft in there so it's through both sides but not sticking out, because we need to tighten this up with our specialty tool. So with that, with the 22mm, get it in there. And this is only going to get tightened down to 6 Newton-meters. So right now I just want to make it just snugged. Then we'll take our torque wrench and tighten it. 6 Newton-meters. That's it. Using your 19mm socket, you want to spin this out, and if you just pull it as you're spinning it, it'll come right out. And then we're going to bring it over to the other side and slide it through. All right, now we're ready to go back in with our shaft. Make sure your washer is in place here. Start sliding through. If you use your 19mm socket, you can spin it and push it through to make it a little easier. If you're going through and it just doesn't want to go and it's fighting you, then you need to pull it out and double check that everything's in alignment. Don't try and get a hammer and just bang it through, because you can do a lot of damage. Now you need to put the washer on, put your nut on. We're going to tighten this nut to 110 Newton-meters. So you're going to need somebody else on the other side, most likely, to hold that. It's possible to do by yourself. You just need a long ratchet. You can do it. Using your 24mm socket, start tightening the nut. At some point, the whole spindle is just going to start spinning. That's where you need to get your 19mm socket on the other side. So now you're going to take your 19mm socket and put it on there. If you have somebody to help you, you're better off if they can hold this. If not, make sure you have a tall enough ratchet on there so you can reach over and start tightening. So now we're going to torque to 110 Newton meters. Okay, now we're going to put the rubber plug back on, and we're going to put our sprocket cover back on. Using our 8mm socket, I'm going to first tighten these by hand and then tighten them down to 9 Newton meters. Now you can reinstall your pivot cover. Now we can remove our strap that we were using to support the swing arm. Let that down. We can install our brake caliper onto the notch and get your fixings for your brake line into the swing arm. There's 2 of them. They just push through. Now we're ready to put our rear wheel on. First we want to take the chain, move it over to this side of the swing arm. You want to make sure you have enough clearance to get underneath this fender. If you don't, and you can't raise it high enough, then you may need to take your fender off. So as you slide this in, you need to make sure your rotor is going between the 2 brake pads. It's very important. Now we want to put the chain onto our sprocket. Now we're ready to start putting our axle in. You want to make sure that your spacers are in place on both sides. Make sure this all lines up nice and even. And when your axle's going in, you want to make sure it goes in there, not like this. And the flat goes to the front of the bike. Lift up the swing arm. Now you want to put your axle adjuster in. Make sure the recess, the flat portion goes to the side, the recess to the outside. And if you don't know for sure that your chain was adjusted properly, then you're going to want to readjust it when this is all done. But if it was and you didn't loosen these, you should be good. Put your washer. Put your nut. Using your 27mm socket, we just want to make this snug. We're not going to tighten it all the way until later because we want to get the shocks on and check our final chain adjustment, and then we'll torque it. Now we can put our rear shocks on. One thing you want to take note of is your preload adjuster goes on the bottom, the bigger side of the spring. Tighter coils go to the top. And this adjuster on this side, the left side of the bike, should be facing out towards the back, so when you're adjusting it, you're adjusting away from the bike. On the other side of the bike, it would be this way, So again, you'd be adjusting away from the bike. To access this stud, you either need to move your exhaust or you have to raise your jack high enough that you can get access to it. Get your bolt, make sure your washer's in place, some blue Loctite, 8mm Allen hex bolt bit, now we torque it down to 28 Newton meters, or 8mm Allen hex bit. Before we install the top of this shock, we want to go to the other side and install that one on the bottom also. And then we can lower the bike and install both sides of the top. All right, now we're going to install the shock on the right side. Make sure that our adjuster is to the front so that when we're adjusting it, you're adjusting out away from the bike. You want to have your tight coils to the top, the adjuster on the bottom. Slide it in. Get your bolt, make sure you have your washer on it. Some blue Loctite. $8mm Allen hex bit. Torque it to 28 Newton meters. Now we can lower it and put the top pieces in. So now we'll start lowering it. You want to keep an eye on both shocks, make sure they're both clear. Before we bolt that on, we want to check the other side, make sure it slides on. And get your bolt, make sure your washer is in place. Some blue Loctite. Your 8mm Allen hex bit. Torque wrench. Torque to 28 Newton meters. Go to the other side and do the same. I'm going to get our bolt, put the washer in place, some blue Loctite, your 8mm Allen hex bit, torque wrench, 28 Newton meters. Now we're going to put the right side cover on. You have these 3 pins that locate into these 3 grommets. So you get it behind. We've lowered the bike. I'm going to check the chain slack. and it's within specifications for this model. So now we can tighten down the axle. Now we're going to torque down the axle nut. You want to make sure your adjusters are seated properly. This one is seated properly, but you need to double check that the other one is still seated properly before you tighten it down. If you find it like this and you torque it down, you're going to do a lot of damage. So you need to make sure that that's still seated where it's supposed to be. Now we're going to torque the axle down. Got a 27mm socket to 110 Newton meters. And at this time, if you have removed your exhaust, it's time to put it back on. And now we're going to install our chain guard. With your 5mm hex bit and blue Loctite on the screw. For this one back here, if you removed your exhaust, it's not a problem. But if you didn't, you may need to use an Allen key to tighten this up. Unless you have a short enough bit to get back here. It's just hand tight, nothing crazy. Now, before we install our handlebar, we need to install the throttle tube back onto the fly-by-wire sensor. This only goes on one way. These two notches here have to align with these two here. And then there's a slot right there that this one goes into. If you try and put them in the wrong way, nothing's going to line up right. And you won't be able to get the bar in. It should look like that when it's all lined up. You should be able to see a clear path through there. Now we're going to take the right throttle side of the handlebar and slide it through. Put the bars into the riser. Again, if you can't slide your bar through there, then that's not lined up properly. Put the clamp on. Now we'll put the screws in. Using our 6mm Allen hex bit. Tighten these up. So now we're trying to line these bars and we want to find center. So I put a piece of tape across the bars, even with the edge. And I'm going to measure from edge to edge. And we have 33¼ inches. So half of 33¼ inches is 16 5/8. So that would be our center line. So we find that on the ruler. 1, 2, 3, 4. Right there. And we'll go to the edge. You know, and this is not a precision way of doing this, but it's close enough. You can take anything that you know is square. In this case, I'm just going to use this cardboard and place it on the line there. And what I'm looking for is that my center should wind up between the U and the M. And when I put it on that mark, even with this, it's pretty much where I'm at. So I think we'll call this bar good. Okay, so to set the level of your bar, we typically like to start off making sure that this is even with the forks. It's a good starting point. Ultimately, when you're all done, you're going to put it where you're comfortable, but this is a great starting point. So once you're happy with your alignment on your bars, you can tighten down the top clamp. On the stock Triumph clamp, you want to tighten down the forward ones first to 24 Newton meters, and then the rear ones to 24 Newton meters. It may be different on aftermarket clamps. Using your 6mm Allen hex bit, tighten to 24 Newton meters. So now you'll notice that your throttle doesn't go all the way to the end. We need to free up some slack in this cable here. You'll find it down here. You just got to pull and push, and you'll get it. Now we got plenty right to the end. We'll have the same thing with this one. Just give it a little pull. We got plenty. So before you do any drilling here, you need to determine, are you going to run bar end mirrors that insert or clamp on the end? You need to use the position of those to determine where you're going to drill your holes here. Once you drill your holes, that's a permanent hole. So you make sure you get it right the first time. If you do run these bar end mirrors, you got to make sure you have enough room that you're not getting binding issues on your throttle either. We are not going to be running bar end mirrors on this. So now what we need to do is we have to drill a hole for this alignment pin to locate the throttle. So once you got this set where you want it, lift this up. We're going to put a piece of tape here. So we have something to mark. One easy way to mark where you need to drill is you can put the tape there and you get some magic marker on that pin, and while it's still wet, lay it over in place. So there's the mark, and that's where I want to drill. So now to drill this hole, if you're experienced at drilling, you could easily do this by center punching that and just drill it by hand. But if you really want precision, there's tools out there like this jig from LSL. This is for 7/8 bars. They have them for 1-inch bars also. And you can screw it on and locate your hole exactly where you want it. And you can't walk at all. So what you're trying to do is find your mark in the center of this hole. And then you tighten it up. Try and make the space as even as you can on each side so that you're drilling straight in. So with a number 9 drill bit, you can place it in the hole. Once you're through, make sure you stop. Don't drill through the other side of the bar. So when you're done, this is what it should look like. Get a nice clean hole. So now we just need to open this hole up slightly more with a 13/64 drill bit. So if you are not using the jig and you're just going to drill this hole outright, then you could just go right to the 13/16. You don't need to use the number 9 drill. You just have to use that because it doesn't fit in the jig. Now we want to screw the housing together with a Phillips head screwdriver. So now we want to locate the start switch. So we're going to put a piece of tape right here. Just like before, I'm going to put some black marker. Make our mark. Now, if you're using the jig, you need to remove this to get it out of the way to fit the jig in there, because the hole won't line up inside the jig. Okay, number 9 drill bit. Okay, nice clean hole. And again, that doesn't fit nice and loosely, so we need to open it up a little bit. A 13/64 bit. So now we can install the clamps. On these two, there's 2 different size screws. You really can't mix them up. The bigger one goes up in here, and the smaller skinny ones are for in there. Both use Phillips head screwdriver. Start with the big ones. Tighten down the throttle. These parts are only plastic, so hand tight should be good. Installing this switch, make sure you route the wires into this little slot right here. Start one of the small screws with the Phillips head screwdriver. Get the other one. Make them tight, but not too tight. Remember, this is just plastic parts again. You could always go back and make it tighter, but once it's broken, it's broken. Now we're going to install the brake light switch. What you want to do is get like a little piece of cardboard, roll it up, and stick it in between the lever right there, just to hold it open. And what that does is keeps you from breaking the tip of your switch off while you're installing it. Put the screw in. With our T20. Tighten it up. Hand tight, it's only plastic. Now we can remove the cardboard. Take our clamp half, put it here. And a screw with our 5mm Allen hex bit. Just get it started. Get the other screw. Again with the 5mm Allen hex bit. For right now, we're just going to make it snug because we're probably going to want to readjust a little bit after the whole job is done. Now we need to mount our reservoir. You have an alignment hole there and the screw hole there. Our T30. Make sure the alignment pin is in the hole. Tighten it down. When it comes to lining this up, you want to make sure these are inboard. This one could come out just a little bit more. Just snug for now. We'll final tighten it later. So now we need to take off this left grip so we can put it over here. Usually we blow them off with the air compressor. It's real easy, but if you don't have an air compressor, you can use alcohol or hand sanitizer or contact cleaner or something. We're gonna try the hand sanitizer trick on this one. It may help to remove that clip first. And see how this goes. And the reason why you want to use something like this and not a WD-40 is because this will dry up and not leave it all slippery. Look at that. Right off. So if you do it fast enough, you can get it back on before the alcohol dries up from the hand sanitizer. If not, you just have to put a little bit more on. Once it's dry, this should stop moving. It's already gripping nice. So we put some tape there. Get our marker. Mark our locator pin. When you make this mark, you kind of want to have this at a 90-degree angle, straight up and down, so that your switches end up like that. You don't want them to end up here or there. That's it, we got a nice mark. So on this side, we're going to show you how to do it freehand without the tool. We made our mark right there. We want to get our center punch mark. right in the center. And that'll keep our drill bit from walking out of the circle there. Now we got a nice hole. It's not quite as nice as when we did it with the jig, but it still works. Okay, so now we want to get our switch housing up here. Make sure our wires are coming through the slot here and not getting pinched. Start our screws in with the Phillips head screwdriver. Start tightening these up. Yeah, make sure we're in the alignment hole. Again, plastic, hand tight. Now we want to put the clutch switch onto the Perch. So opening this up is going to make that easier. You have a little alignment pin there, needs to go in the hole. With your T20, screw that in. We'll make it tight. Now we're going to install the clutch perch. Get our screw. With our 5mm. Get that one started. Top one, again with our 5mm Allen Hicks bit. Now we just want to make sure that we're staying a little bit inboard of the end of the bar. And when it's out, it actually goes past the end of the bar. And then we can tighten it. But we're not going to fully torque it down until we're ready to sit on the bike and set it up for comfort. Now we're going to install the union. Using two 11mm wrenches. Snug that down. And you get them to where they're a little bit close spot. And you can make them a little bit tighter. You don't want to crank them so hard that you deform anything. Just want them nice and solid and sealed. Okay, now I want to insert the upper line through here, staying above this line and above the wires on the other side. And now we can connect the two here. Get our two 11mm, tight. Put it in the locator there. Okay, now we're going to run this up here behind this wire through the loop. And underneath the speedo over to our master cylinder. Now we're going to install the straight banjo fitting. You want to make sure you have your copper washer. The rounded portion goes in towards the master cylinder. The pointed version goes into your hose. With a 9/16 socket or wrench, I'm going to tighten it up. Now we can attach our hose. With an 11mm open end wrench, tighten it. Now we can install the rubber band, keep everything nice and tidy. So now we're going to install the clutch cable. There's two ends. The threaded end goes down at the bottom over here. The end with the ferrule goes up at the top. Also, you'll have this thicker coating on the cable, which makes it more rigid. We want to slide that all the way down to the bottom towards the threaded end. You guide the cable up. Okay, come up under the tree, through this loop, and towards the perch. Now we'll go down and install the bottom first. So to install the bottom, need to push it up a little further than we need to. I'm going to pull that rubber piece off the end here and unscrew one of the nuts. Now we can pull the cable back down and through here. Put your nut back on. Push the rubber piece back on. Okay. Now we want to take our cable, and you have this little slot here. You just need to get the cable in there. You need to put it past this thicker part here just to get it through the slot. Now we can move to the top. Now we're going to install the cable into the lever. First thing we want to do is we need to make sure that the slots are aligned across here so we can get the cable through. So in order to do that, I align the first one, and then I turn this one. So now they're as tight as they can be, making that the shortest distance. I'm going to push the ferrule up into the lever. And in. So after the cable's in, we want to turn this out a bit. So 4 turns should be plenty. And that way, if we need to adjust it back in, you can do so. Then we go down to the bottom and adjust it there. Now to adjust the cable here, I just pull it with your thumb until you can hear the lever closing there. Turn that nut so it doesn't go back. Turn this nut, and using a 13mm, tighten the jam nut down. And now any fine adjustments can be done up top. So for your clutch adjustment, you just want to make sure you have a little free play before you're actually feeling tension on the lever. Should be about 1/8 of an inch, which is about the width of a nickel. That's just for starters, and then once you're on the bike and riding it, you can fine-tune this so it engages where you're comfortable and the bike's not creeping anywhere and the clutch isn't slipping. Okay, we want to install these side covers that were here. We also want to make sure our ABS sensor is connected. This back piece slides in over here underneath everything. And then the top piece, all the wires should go under the big portion. The brake line should go through this top piece. And then your clutch cable should end up in this piece here. Start our screws, making sure the back plate hole and the outer support line up together. So using a T30, all right, before you tighten it down completely, just make sure everything is where it's supposed to be. Clutch cable here, brake line there, wires in here. T30. Hand tight. So keep in mind that the .4 fluid in this ABS system is very corrosive, and you don't want to get it on your paint or any of the other finishes on the motorcycle because it will eat away at it. If you do, then you need to flush it down with water, and a lot of water, to make sure that it doesn't keep eating away at it. And you need to do it right away, don't wait. But the best bet is to just not get it on anything. Okay, now we're going to start bleeding our brakes. We need to take this lid off. Start with a Phillips head screwdriver. Take these 2 screws out. Again, you want to be careful not to drip .4 brake fluid on anything, especially painted parts. You want to fill this reservoir with fresh brake fluid from an unopened bottle. All right, now we're going to start bleeding the brakes. This time around, we're going to use the air-powered Mighty Vac. make things go a little faster. We hook up our hose. I always like to keep my hose going upwards. That way air goes that way and fluid stays down that way. Using an 8mm wrench, loosen the bleeder valve. Now we can turn on the mighty vac. While you're sucking the fluid through the system, you need to make sure that this always remains full, because if it runs empty, you're going to suck air through this hose and you're going to have to start all over again. The whole point is we just want fluid and no air. So once we have solid fluid coming up into our hose, we can shut off and we can start to close this. One thing you want to do is push on the handle and just see if you get any air out of there. And then start closing. You may need to do that once or twice so you start feeling a firm break. All right, I'm going to top the fluid off. And now I'm going to pump the handle up. It's not quite there yet, but it is getting more firm as I pump it. Now, while holding the handle down, I want to crack the bleeder, see if we can get any air out of it. There's some air bubbles for sure. And we'll pump it up again. Again, while holding the handle down. Crack the bleeder open. Close it. Again. Now it's starting to get nice and firm. And once we get it solid with no air coming out, you're done. Looks like it might have been the last bubble to come out. Feels good. So now the brake lever should feel nice and firm, not go all the way to the grip when you squeeze it. We want to top it off. Depending on how much brake pad you have left, if you were working with worn out brake pads, you would not want to go all the way to the upper level. But this bike's got brand new brake pads on it. So now we want to put our cap and reservoir gasket back in. This plastic piece goes on top of the reservoir gasket, and that drops in. There's reliefs for where the screw holes are, there and there. And now we put the gasket cap back on. Drop the screws in the hole. The Phillips head screwdriver. Tighten it down. We just want to make these hand tight. You have a rubber seal that's going to compress and seal everything off. It's going into a metal nut there, but the whole reservoir is just plastic, so you could crush it. After you've removed the hose from here, you just want to make sure that you're nice and tight. Don't go crazy tightening this because you don't want to destroy the seal in there. It's got a tapered seal between the bleeder valve and the body of the brake caliper. And you don't want to have to replace the whole brake caliper over tightening this. So once that's done, we want to put our cap back on. Now we just want to put a rubber band over here. Keep this nice and clean. On the inside of the tank, we have these two slots here that need to go into these locators on each side of the frame. So once you have those located in their position, it's good to have something, a wood block, a jar, whatever you got to hold the tank up. It'll help you get under here and put your plugs back in place and your hose and whatnot. We need to plug these plugs from the tank into the plugs on the motorcycle. You can't mix them up. They're two different sizes, and there's just no way to mix them up, so don't worry about that. And you'll hear them and feel them click when they lock. So you want to make sure they don't come unplugged later on. There's two little slots up here that they attach to. That might be a little tricky to get them on there, but that's where they go. Yeah. Like that. Now we want to put our fuel line on. You want to make sure this is unlocked so you can see the full square there. Once you hear it click like that, now we can push the lock over. She's on. There's a guide for the fuel hose right up here under the tank. You want to make sure it's installed there before you lower the tank down. Now you want to install the vent line. There's a spigot right here. Just going to need to push it on there. And once that's on, you got your little clip there. And then we have another one up front here. If your bike was equipped with this separator here and you were able to separate it there, you just need to plug that back in. Now that all the wires and hose assembly is plugged in, we can lower the tank and bolt it up. Slide our bolt through, put on our nut. With your 10mm wrench and your 8mm socket, tighten it up. Make it a little more than hand tight. Good. Now we want to install the negative battery cable. It's a number 3 Phillips screwdriver or a 10mm if you have. Turn on the key, make sure everything works before you put your seat back on. Turn on the key, make sure everything works before you put your seat back on. Left turn signals, right turn signal, brake lights. Okay, looks like everything's working. Now we can install the seat. These two hooks here need to go into here, and then this will go in. Push down, you hear that click, and we're locked on. Okay, once we're happy with the way our bar is set height-wise here, and then we get our levers set to where we're comfortable, our mirrors are working well, now we can tighten this all down. We want to start with the handlebar clamp. We're going to tighten the two front and then the two rear to 24 Newton meters. Using your 5mm. Tighten that up. Again. And keep in mind, this is, again, just the starting point. Once you get out riding, you may want to readjust things to where you're a little more comfortable. And that's the Tracker Handlebar Kit for the Street Series.